Chapter 5. Conflict between parent and child. Around the time Christina and the others had just left for Rio's mansion, Duke Gustav Hugenot had summoned a girl to the guest house. "Sorry to call you here so suddenly, Elise." The girl's name was Elise Brandt, and she was the daughter of a count family in Beltrum. She was born as a high-ranking noble, but she normally had nothing to do with Duke Hugenot. Not at all. Duke Hugenot and Elise were the only two people in the room. Was he going to ask her to be his mistress? Or was there another reason? At any rate, Elise had no idea why she was summoned, so she could only shake her head stiffly. "There's no need to be so nervous, I just want to ask you something in private. I'd like you to promise not to speak a word of this to anyone else. Can you do that?" Duke Hugenot said, explaining the reason he had called her here. "I understand. In noble society, ranks were absolute. If someone of higher standing made a request like this, there was no way of refusing." Elise nodded timidly. "Good. Then I'll get straight to the point. Around 5 years ago, when you were in your 6th year at the academy, an outdoor drill was held. Do you recall that?" "Yes." Duke Hugenot cut to the chase. When Elise nodded, a look of guilt flashed across her face, and Duke Hugenot didn't miss it. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Do you remember the incident that occurred during the drill? There was a monster attack on the students." "No, not that one," Duke Hugenot dismissed immediately. Elise paused awkwardly. "Princess Flora nearly fell off a cliff," she eventually said. "At the time, you were one of the witnesses to Princess Flora's incident." "Yes." In a wounded state, Stuart, my fool of a son, bumped into Princess Flora and caused her to nearly fall off the cliff. But before that, another student had pushed him into her. Ultimately, that student had to take blame for the incident. Isn't that right?" Duke Hugenot listed the facts without any emotion. It was clear Elise was getting more nervous with every passing moment. "I did not see which student it was who pushed Stuart," she said, voice cracking. "Is it just me? Or does it sound like you're not telling the truth?" "That's not true." Her eyes were clearly darting about the place. Duke Hugenot sighed in a troubled manner, then stared at her with a look of resolve. "I think you actually saw who it was that pushed my son. Am I wrong?" Elise hesitated. "Why are you asking this now?" she asked warily. "I decided I want to know the truth," Duke Hugenot answered immediately. Elise's eyes widened in surprise. "Like I said at the start, this is just between you and me. Even if you give me a different testimony to what you gave in the past, you will not be blamed for anything. So will you please tell me the truth as you remember it?" And as Duke Hugenot hoped, it was indeed your son, Stuart, who bumped into Princess Flora. There's also no doubt that this was why she nearly fell off the cliff. Elise slowly began recalling her memories of the incident. "Are you saying there's an inconsistency elsewhere?" "It was a different person who initially pushed Stuart. Stuart insisted it was the black-haired commoner who shoved him, but it was actually a different male student who did it." Duke Hugenot pinched the bridge of his nose with a frown. "Who?" "No, please tell me everything you remember." "Everyone was in a panic because of the monster attack. Stuart was wounded in the process and grabbed another male student to ask for his help. But that student thrust him aside because he was in his way and ended up throwing him into Princess Flora. So the commoner student shouldn't have been blamed for the incident, you say?" "Yes. All he did was save Princess Flora, falling off the cliff in her stead." "So how did he end up shouldering the blame?" "Because Stuart claimed the commoner was the one who shoved him." The hand Duke Hugenot was covering his eyes with was shaking. But no matter how much he hid his eyes, it was clear at a glance that his mouth was twisted in an enraged frown. The student who pushed Stuart agreed with Stuart's claim. Stuart was really menacing at that moment, so I couldn't speak up. Elise explained herself in a panic, either out of guilt for revealing the truth so late, or out of fear of Duke Hugenot's fury. "No, you're not at fault here. I'm sorry my son has caused so much trouble." Duke Hugenot took a deep breath to calm down, then removed his hand from his eyes. "Once again, I must remind you not to tell anyone else what you told me today. As soon as you step out of this room, forget everything," he emphasized. "Why yes, sir." "Good. You may leave now." "Please excuse me." Elise bowed nervously, then got up out of her chair and hurried out of the room. Once the door closed, Duke Hugenot was alone once again. Silence stretched for a long moment. "Grr!" Duke Hugenot swung his right hand down and slammed the table in anger. A dull thud echoed through the room. For someone normally so calm, it was a show of extreme emotion coming from him. That moron, a fatal trap, had been sleeping somewhere he had never expected. Just how many times was he going to drag the family name through mud? Duke Hugenot gritted his teeth. The orphan named Rio, who had vanished from Beltrum after being falsely accused of a crime, and the mysterious honorary knight named Haruto Amakawa, who was climbing in power in Galark. Just yesterday he would have never connected the two, yet today he was facing the possibility of them being the same person. While it isn't confirmed yet, it's extremely likely. During the battle with the golem, the man named Haruto Amakawa had been referred to as Rio. Celia, who for some reason was close to Haruto, once taught the class Rio was in. The way Christina was oddly reserved when it came to Haruto, and how she was once classmates with Rio during her time at the Royal Academy. Just by adding one piece of information, the dots all joined each other one after another. There was too much circumstantial evidence to dismiss it all as a coincidence. Suppose he's the same person. Celia definitely knows his identity already. What do I do? Who knows what will happen if the past becomes public? The biggest problem was how deeply Duke Hugenot had been involved in blaming Rio for the crime he had never committed. Stuart may have created the problem, but Duke Hugenot himself had pulled the strings to clean up the mess. But back then, the Arbor faction had been gaining power, so Duke Hugenot had to do everything he could to avoid being caught in a scandal. Making his son take responsibility for the second princess nearly falling off a cliff was out of the question. That's why he had blindly believed Stuart's testimony without investigation and arranged for the blame to be placed on Rio, who had disappeared from the scene. As an orphan, Rio had been an extremely convenient target to use as a scapegoat. There had been no reason to hesitate. It had been the best move at the time. But now, Rio was the honorary knight of the Galark kingdom. King Francois had deep trust in him, and he was also close to their hero, Satsuki. He was no longer a person Duke Hugenot could afford to make an enemy of. Now, it was the worst possible move I could have made. To think the person I discarded as a scapegoat would be the person we needed most. Bitter regret washed over Duke Hugenot. If he hadn't looked down on Rio for being an orphan and persecuted him, if he had treated him with fairness and respect, they may have received Rio's assistance by now. In fact, if the truth of how he had framed Rio ever came to light, Duke Hugenot's life as a noble would be over. Even worse, I sent an assassin after him to silence him. If that's ever exposed, there'll be no way of excusing myself. It would have been troublesome if Rio ever returned and gave his own testimony. That's why Duke Hugenot had sent the rare werbeast he had raised to track his scent and assassinate him. However, that assassin had never returned. She must have been killed or left to die somewhere. Up until just yesterday, Duke Hugenot had banished all memory of the assassin girl, Latifa, to a corner of his mind. Either way, it's clear she failed at the assassination. At least she had a collar of submission on, so she wouldn't have been able to speak even if she was caught or defeated. Indeed, back then, Latifa had been unable to speak in any way that disadvantaged her master due to the collar of submission. If she tried to pass information on while knowing it could harm her master, an agonizing pain would run through her brain. There was no way Duke Hugenot would have known that Rio had used spirit arts to imitate extremely difficult dispel magic to remove the collar. As long as she doesn't speak, there's no way for anyone to prove I was the one who ordered the assassination. I should be more worried about information leaking from somewhere else. Right now, Queen Christina and the others are at his mansion. Before realizing the truth, he would have considered it a good thing for the restoration to become closer to him. But that was no longer the case. Christina, Flora, and Roanna had all been on the same team as Rio during the outdoor drill. And that wasn't all. Christina and Roanna had been Rio's classmates. Flora would have interacted with him elsewhere before too. Master Rio. The image of Sora calling Rio's name flashed through Duke Hugenot's head once again. Rio and Sora had teleported to the rooftop garden to face the golem. Christina, Flora, and Roanna had been standing right beside him, so they would have heard Sora's words as well. If I've noticed it, Queen Christina and the others will be able to notice it too. Or have they noticed already and are feigning ignorance? What if they're gathering in the mansion right now to discuss the possibility? It was possible they had noticed this a while ago. All kinds of potential scenarios flooded Duke Hugenot's head, muddling his thoughts. Should I disclose everything after all? Duke Hugenot ruffled his hair with his right hand fretfully. In reality, when he had met Christina earlier, his plan had been to bring up Rio to her. That was also why he'd had Stuart attend the meeting with him. But he had been unable to organize his thoughts in time and backed out at the last minute. The reason for that was most likely, as already mentioned, he feared what would happen if the fact he had tried to frame Rio was revealed. It was only natural to fear it. The wrong move could result in Duke Hugenot losing his position, resulting in the restoration disintegrating. But even then, the restoration needs his power. It's absolutely essential. Duke Hugenot still believed that Rio was necessary to the future of the restoration. That was why he was desperately racking his brains for the correct way of gaining Rio's assistance. It shouldn't be impossible. He's helped us in the past with our dilemmas, even if that was because of Celia's presence. Of course, he didn't think Rio had forgotten about the outdoor drill incident either. The first possibility Duke Hugenot had considered was Rio getting close to them for revenge. It was a scenario he had gone over in his head many times now, but he's had plenty of chances to get his revenge on us. But he didn't. His intent on hiding his past. In other words, Rio probably had no intention of seeking revenge. And he didn't want to bring up the past again either. There's no reason for me to enter the lion's den on purpose, is there? If he was to seek Rio's assistance for the restoration, wouldn't it be better to maintain his ignorance? But considering Rio's character, a sincere apology might be necessary first. I have to make a decision before the next time I meet Queen Christina. Duke Hugenot was at his wits' end for the rest of the night. Meanwhile, at the same guest house of the Galark Castle, Stuart Hugenot was sitting in a chair in his room, legs shaking in small but fierce movements. The next moment, he stood up and paced the room restlessly. His face was pale with intense panic. "Damn it," he yelled at the top of his lungs. The reason for his current state was clear. Why? Why is it him? Why does he have to appear now? Rio, the boy who once disappeared after being framed with a crime, had potentially reappeared nearby as the man named Haruto Amakawa. No, wait. Is it really him though? Is Haruto Amakawa Rio? His thoughts were all over the place. Or rather, he refused to believe it. He didn't want to think of Rio and Haruto Amakawa as the same person. He wanted them to be different people. But there was strong proof of them being the same person. I couldn't understand why Professor Celia was so close to that man, but now, if Haruto Amakawa was Rio, then it made sense. When Stuart attended the Royal Academy, there were rumors of Celia being close to Rio. There were many male students who weren't amused by that, and Stuart had been one of them. If so, that means the professor knows his identity. She would have heard about what happened at the outdoor drill from him. On top of that, she's staying with him. In other words, Celia must blindly believe in Rio's innocence. He too would have heard about what happened after he fell off the cliff from the professor. Like what part of the story was inconsistent and how it was handled after. That was probably why he had vanished after the outdoor drill. The reality was that Rio had directly witnessed Stuart giving his false testimony, but Stuart had no way of knowing that. He must know about how I lied. The guilt of the lie he had told made Stuart stiffen. The truth was, he knew exactly who had pushed him during the outdoor drill. He had known, yet claimed that it had been Rio who pushed him. No, but there weren't any other witnesses who saw it. At the very least, neither Princess Christina nor Princess Flora saw anything. Roanna shouldn't have either. In that case, was there anyone else who could declare he had been lying? Even if Rio pleaded innocence, there was no way of proving it as long as Stuart didn't change his testimony. That's right. There's no evidence. He knew there was no way of proving his innocence, so he changed his name and started a new life. The situation still favored him, Stuart concluded with a much more relaxed smile. But how does that explain the different color of his hair? Is he really a different person after all? Or is it the effect of an artifact that can affect other people's perception? Stuart didn't know that Rio had an artifact that could change his hair color. Christina had traveled from Celia's house to Redania with altered hair color too, but there were very few people in the restoration who knew that. Whatever. Either way, I just have to insist he was the one who pushed me. Even if he pleads innocence or claims that I'm lying, Nothing will change. Stuart tried to reassure himself he was fine, but his expression was still stiff. What was that lowly commoner even thinking? Not only did he have the nerve to appear before us so boldly, he even invited Queen Christina to the mansion. It was hard to believe these were the actions of a man who had committed a crime in the past, Stuart thought in disbelief. But that thought only lasted for a brief moment. No, that's just the scum he is. He's so desperate for validation, he couldn't hold back his craving for the limelight. Being a lowborn meant he'd never received the approval of others, so he was dying to be treated specially. A clear inferiority complex, if you ask me. Greedy filth. HMPH. In order to dispel his lingering anxiety, Stuart let out a condescending snort. He was trying to keep calm by looking down on Rio. He probably changed his name because he wanted to hide his dirty past as an orphan of the slums. But once he got a taste of the higher world at the Royal Academy, he yearned for nobility. That's why he started gaining fame in the Galark Kingdom, because he couldn't resist his need for validation despite his shameful past. Stuart sneered, convinced that this was the truth. However, but he really is a shallow fool. He doesn't understand how small noble society truly is. He must have thought he wouldn't have to face any of Beltram's nobles if he left the kingdom. Then, of all people, it had to be us. Stuart suddenly gasped as though he had realized something. Wait, was it really a coincidence? When we were attacked by monsters in Amand, he appeared before us. Was he following us on purpose? What if he held a grudge for what happened at the outdoor drill? The guilt of what Stuart had done haunted him, making him suspect Rio was trying to exact revenge on them. That's right. Alphonse vanished immediately after he appeared in Amand. And at the Ricker Guild's restaurant, he made me get on my knees and bow to him. Had he been waiting for a chance to get revenge the entire time? The Hugenot faction's downfall from the Beltram Kingdom would have been the perfect opportunity. As Stuart recalled the events of the past, the humiliation he felt rose once again. Damn it! Are you saying that the lowly commoner made me bow to him? He yelled furiously. He must have been ecstatic. How dare he look down on me? Stuart shook from head to toe with rage. The humiliation he felt was intense. You're below, I'm above, that had been the unmistakable status. But it had now collapsed, and their positions were reversed, something which he couldn't bear. An artifact that can alter people's perceptions and memories. Wouldn't it have been easy for him to use that and control Alphonse, making him cause trouble in his drunk state? That was something that would be impossible to prove, but that has to be it. He's trying to get revenge on us. It has to be his fault Alphonse vanished from Redania. No, what if he was killed? Convinced that was the truth, Stuart looked horrified. Father has noticed his other identity. Otherwise he wouldn't have asked me about him. But is he seriously trying to gain his assistance? He might be targeting Queen Christina and the others. Not to mention me. There was no telling when he would be stabbed in the back. The fact that Rio had a motive to do so made Stuart shudder. No. Even if we gained his assistance, I'd never be able to trust him. Who knows what vulgar demands he'll make in return? In the otherwise silent room, the twitching of his legs echoed loudly. Wait a minute. What if he requests I be punished as revenge? Stuart's entire body froze. Would father abandon me? He had been excited when Duke Hugenot had allowed him to sit in on his meeting with Christina, thinking he was finally redeeming himself. But what if he had been terribly mistaken? Stuart's face paled further. Shouldn't he need evidence to do that? Just like how I need evidence that he resents us and killed Alphonse with his own hands. But if I don't get rid of him, he will get rid of me. If he could find proof that Rio had killed Alphonse, Rio would be unable to do anything about the incident at the outdoor drill. But how do I find any proof Alphonse was killed by him when it happened so long ago? Back then, Alphonse had gone to investigate the forests near Amand with the other Knights of the Restoration. The monster attack on Amand had happened immediately after, so it was concluded that he had been killed by the swarms of monsters in the forest. But no corpse had been recovered, so he was still technically missing. Damn it! Stuart yelled again, losing his temper. It's impossible. There's no way of finding proof. Even if I ask to go to Amand, I'll never receive approval. So what could he do? Is there anything else? Like a weakness of his? Stuart's legs started shaking again out of fear of Rio. The next morning, by a path near the guest house, Stuart had made a promise to meet up with Duke Gregory between his patrol shifts. His right foot was tapping against the stone path restlessly. I wanted more time to think. In the end, he had spent the whole night thinking. While he wanted nothing more than to skip their meeting, he couldn't bear having Duke Gregory prying into his secrets behind his back. He had considered consulting his father, but there was no guarantee he would protect him. Thus, Stuart chose to meet Duke Gregory of his own accord. Damn it! Why do I have to go through this? Stuart thought to himself bitterly. Looks like someone didn't have a good night's sleep, a voice said. Duke Gregory had appeared. It seems I might be able to hear something interesting today. He expressed concern for Stuart's well-being, but his mouth was curled into a smile. I couldn't sleep well, Stuart replied sullenly. Although he was in front of another kingdom's duke, he didn't have the composure to control his own emotions. Now, what do you have to tell me? I'm guessing you won't be satisfied if I said it was nothing. Of course not. I have no proof of this, and it would be dangerous to make a fuss without any evidence. Are you willing to accept that? Stuart asked as a last resort. Hearing that makes me even more curious, Duke Gregory said with a dismissive laugh. Stuart began to speak in resignation. I don't want to call him an acquaintance, but there was a guy I once knew who committed a crime and went on the run. Oh! Duke Gregory's reaction was calm. In fact, he was intently focused on keeping his emotions off his face to avoid giving the other party any advantage. His name was Rio. That's why I was so surprised when I heard that name from you yesterday. But if you were familiar with his face, wouldn't you have noticed him earlier? Yes. That's why I said I don't have proof. Rio vanished nearly 5 years ago. He's grown older now, and his facial structure has changed. His hair color was also different back then. I can't say for sure if they're the same person. Indeed, puberty can change people dramatically, Duke Gregory murmured. However, even if facial structures changed, hair color didn't. Strange. But it was at this point that Stuart gave him his daring conclusion. However, I think there's a high chance they're the same person, he said. What? Like I said, I don't have proof. But his lying about his background. If what you say is true, he should be tried for his crimes. At present, this was all Stuart's assumption. Duke Gregory could only take the information as any other rumor. Yes, he should be tried, but there's no proof. He's secured his current position as a noble. Defaming the honorary knight with no evidence would only lead to my own arrest, Stuart said. If he truly has a dirty past, it will affect our kingdom as well. But why do you think they're the same person when you don't have any proof? The same people he was close to back then are situated around Haruto Amakawa now. That's too much to be dismissed as a coincidence, don't you think? Oh, if what he says is true, we may be able to expose Amakawa's murky past. But it's too weak. There needs to be more proof to censure him. If Stuart's testimony was true, it could be enough to shake Rio up even now. But one wrong move, and it could be considered defamation. Duke Gregory wasn't willing to risk that without evidence, especially if he was to be the source of the information. Whatever move is made next needs to be initiated by this boy. And so, Duke Gregory immediately decided to make Stuart act advantageously for himself. But first, in order to check whether there was any value in using him, Duke Gregory questioned his next move. Do you plan on censuring Amakawa, Stuart? He asked. It depends on what proof I can find. I know I won't have any chance if I just bring it up now. No doubt about that. So what will you do? There's nothing I can do but search for something to drag him down with. Though I doubt it'll be easy to find such a thing. In that case, why don't you try explaining things in more detail? I may be able to assist. Are you sure? Stuart was wide-eyed with surprise. He seemed grateful for the offer of help, but there was a look of caution in his reaction as well. Like I said, if Amakawa has a dark past, it will be our kingdom's problem too. I see. But it all depends on what kind of past he's hiding. You said he had committed a crime, but what exactly was that crime? I don't mind telling you, but only if you agree to my conditions. Oh, how interesting. Duke Gregory grinned. For a pawn in his plan to censure Rio, that was an appropriate response. Very well. State your demands. First, I want you to leave the confrontation to me. That means you won't dig into his past without my permission. I want you to keep silent about his past until I'm ready to censure him. In exchange, I'll share whatever information you want. Stuart listed his conditions, hoping to seize the initiative for himself. Is that all? If you agree that the past I'm about to tell you is evil, then I'd like you to promise you'll help me bring him down. That's all. Got it. In that case, that won't be a problem. Let's relocate, we can get your conditions written down on paper. Duke Gregory readily agreed with Stuart's conditions. If Stuart himself was offering to stand in the line of fire, he had no reason to refuse. In fact, it suited his intentions perfectly. Is it okay to leave a trail like that? Stuart asked. Of course. You wouldn't feel assured with a mere verbal promise either, no? I appreciate it. Stuart also seemed to feel more trust towards Duke Gregory for being willing to put their agreement to paper. He was smiling for the first time today, exhaling in relief. However, Duke Gregory hadn't offered to leave a paper trail of the conditions out of goodwill. As a noble with experience in the way of the world, he would never suggest something for another person's benefit. He was only doing it because a paper trail was in his own interest. Verbally promising to help leaves me open to bearing responsibility for anything. It'd be better to have my involvement objectively written down. He planned to assist enough to get a say in the discussions if Rio was successfully censured and would have the ability to shift all the responsibility onto Stuart if everything failed. They moved to a meeting room that Duke Gregory had been granted in the castle and wrote the conditions Stuart had listed down on paper. Will this do? Duke Gregory asked. Yes, this is fine. Now, let's hear what you have to say about Amakawa's past. Duke Gregory looked at Stuart expectantly once both copies of the contract were signed and gestured for him to give his statement. Very well. Stuart steeled himself and began to explain Rio's past to Duke Gregory. However, he made sure to hide the part where he had lied to shift the blame onto Rio, and exaggerated a bit to make himself sound better. In short, this was the story of the boy named Rio. Originally an orphan from the slums, Rio pushed Stuart at an outdoor drill, which ultimately resulted in Flora nearly falling off a cliff. Rio was to be punished for this, but he disappeared before he could be caught. Thus, it was possible that Rio still held resentment for Stuart. He could have been plotting his revenge when he made such a timely appearance at Amand, and Alphonse may have been killed by him as part of that, and so forth. Thus, Stuart finished his explanation. Phut. Bwahaha. I see. If that is the truth, then it is indeed something that cannot be ignored. We cannot have the honorary knight of our kingdom be a criminal that attempted to kill a foreign royal and fled before capture. Duke Gregory imagined the fallout of such a truth being exposed and was unable to hold back his laughter. And, yes, I am happy to actively assist you. Thank you so much. It's too early to thank me. Like you said at the beginning, we're lacking critical evidence to prove that the two are the same person. Creating a fuss now would only stir the rumor mill. At worst, you could be accused of defamation. If the goal was to bring him down from his position, then they needed undeniable proof. Duke Gregory emphasized this calmly. I know, Stuart had a bitter expression on his face. Creating bad rumors about him isn't enough. I need to create an incident big enough for people to lose trust in him, something that can at least get him banished from the castle. Unless he could get rid of the risk of Rio claiming he was falsely accused, Stuart wouldn't be able to sleep soundly at night. If possible, I'd like to obtain proof Alphonse was killed by him. Killing a foreign noble out of revenge was something that couldn't be overlooked. That's too difficult to be reasonable. He may have had a motive, but a corpse was never found, no? Duke Gregory said. Even if Rio had killed Alphonse, without a corpse, there was no way of proving it. Pursuing that route would require locating the corpse first. That's true. In a way, Amakawa himself is the greatest evidence there is. If we can prove he is the same person, his past crimes will naturally come to light. Why don't we pursue the path of proving that Rio is the same person as Haruto Amakawa instead? Duke Gregory suggested. The grim look on Stuart's face was probably because he knew that proving them to be the same person wasn't enough to establish Rio's guilt. If Rio claimed he was innocent, an investigation could lead to the discovery of Stuart's lie. That was why he needed more material to drag Rio down in case that happened, so that no one would be able to trust Rio's statement. Good point. But the sin of attempted murder against royalty is grave. Even if the restoration shows leniency to him, the Galark Kingdom will definitely punish him. I won't allow him to get away unpunished. Such unfit behavior from the honorary knight would be scandalous, Duke Gregory said. But in spite of his words, and once he's fallen from grace, it might be amusing to offer him a hand back up and make him indebted to me. Duke Gregory had no intention of completely ending Ryo's life as a noble. This was because he acknowledged Ryo's abilities. He believed that it was only appropriate for Ryo to be valued for his long list of achievements, based on the results. However, that didn't mean he was impressed by the current situation where Ryo was the only one achieving all the success. That's why he was so eager to find material that could drag Ryo down, and that was why he was trying to use Stuart to his advantage. Unaware of that, Stuart rejoiced at the fact he had found a reliable ally. Oh, how reassuring. I'm glad I consulted you. I'm glad you think that of me, but are you sure you won't consult your father about this? Duke Gregory didn't want anyone else to interfere with this incident, so he preferred if Duke Hugenot stayed out of it. But it could be problematic if he didn't at least confirm things first, so he asked for the sake of the future. Although I was a victim, the fact I hit Princess Flora when I was pushed angered my father a lot. He had to cover for me because of it too. I see. It sounds like his father was forced to use some questionable methods. It's no surprise his father was angered by that. But this also means that if things go well, Duke Hugenot will be indebted to me too. Duke Gregory took a guess at the situation and smiled. But if you expose Amakawa's sins, your father may change his mind about you. He whispered the sweet words Stuart wanted to hear the most. Stuart's expression relaxed, pleased to hear those words too. I sure hope so, he mumbled. However, if this is the truth, he truly is a shameless man. The perpetrator appearing before the victim, innocently pretending to be someone else. The man is conceited and desperate for validation. After all, he started as a lowly commoner from the slums. He probably couldn't get over his admiration for noble society. I see. Stuart spoke of Ryo's character with great detest, but Duke Gregory only showed a half-hearted reaction to his description. This was because Duke Gregory had his own image of Ryo, and it was notably different from Stuart's. To him, Ryo was a man of many mysteries, too calm for anyone to read his emotions or intentions, always eerily detached from the world. That was his image of Haruto Amakawa and also why Duke Gregory was wary of the questions surrounding Ryo. Well, if he truly is as he describes, then that would be interesting too. Somewhat impressed, Duke Gregory smiled. Are you sure Princess Flora hasn't noticed his identity? He asked. She didn't care about him in the slightest back then. They barely had any chance to interact. Even I didn't notice until yesterday. Although they had attended the same academy, they lived in different worlds. Stuart sneered. Duke Gregory didn't know how much Ryo's appearance and impression had changed since back then, so he could only accept those words at face value. However, he had his apprehensions. The fact that the possibility cannot be entirely dismissed is rather dangerous. That being said, he didn't want Stuart to feel daunted by that possibility, so he purposefully chose not to point that out. Is there anyone else in the current restoration who knew him before? Duke Gregory asked. From the academy, there's Queen Christina and Lady Roanna. And I think there was another female student who was in the same group. If there are other people who know of Amakawa's other identity, asking them to testify that he's the same person is one definite method of proof. The more testimonies there were, the more trustworthy it would be. But Queen Christina is currently indebted to him. Princess Flora is smitten as well, and Roanna will always obey those two. If I ask them for help, they may crush our chance of exposing his sin in advance. So we need someone we can silence if we're to seek assistance from others, Duke Gregory said. Come to think of it, you said there was someone he was close to back then situated around him now. Who might that be? Celia Clare. She was a professor at the academy back then. Oh, that woman. If I recall correctly, she currently lives at his mansion. Yes. I'm almost certain she's chosen to be with him despite his identity. I see. If Haruto Amakawa was really Ryo, that was a natural conclusion to make. Back then, he used his position as a student to take advantage of a kind teacher. Professor Celia is being deceived. She just doesn't know his true nature, Stuart growled bitterly, having respected Celia as his own teacher. If she's staying silent despite knowing his past, that would count as assisting a criminal, an illegal matter that should be tried. Are you suggesting we threaten her? She's a potential candidate. If the threat works, she'd be easy to manage as a witness, Duke Gregory said with a shallow smile. I think the other female student would be easier to silence than Queen Christina or Princess Flora. And she doesn't live with him, unlike Professor Celia. Unwilling to threaten the teacher he was indebted to, Stuart nominated Elise Brandt, the other student who had been on the scene, as a witness. Then we'll consider that person a candidate too. It's better to have more options whether we actually approach them for assistance or not. Is there anyone else from that time who knows of him? Duke Gregory asked. He was isolated in the academy, and I don't think he knew anyone outside. But I can't be certain, Stuart said hesitantly, unsure of his answer. Then maybe we can consider the others close to him as candidates. What do you mean? For example, his little sister. A relative of his should naturally know about his past, no? A little sister? As far as I know, the man named Rio didn't have a sister. Please don't tell me you've got him mistaken for someone else at this point. Duke Gregory gave Stuart a dubious look, sending him into a fluster. Oh, of course not. I'm pretty sure of it. There are just too many coincidences. How incompetent. We're trying to prove whether those coincidences were inevitable or not. They were trying to use those coincidences as the basis of their evidence, but in a way, that was nothing more than an assumption that abandoned all logical reasoning. It was by no means easy to prove objective inevitability. Doing so could even require the use of dirty or high-handed methods. Duke Gregory looked down on Stuart harshly, wondering if he understood that. Well, it's fine. Either way, in order to bring him down, we'll need to make an attack eventually. In any case, it was Stuart who would handle the matter. All Duke Gregory had to do was encourage him to move for him, right? In fact, it might be better for you to just show up in front of him. Why is that? Wouldn't you want to take another look at Amakawa's face? You may find something new if you observe him with the knowledge of his other identity. Good point. Now that he thought about it, Stuart had never paid close attention to Haruto Amakawa's face before. Before censuring him, it would be best to confirm what he looked like at least once. The problem is how to get you near him. Princess Charlotte handles all the public relations of that mansion. It isn't easy to get a meeting request granted. It wasn't impossible to visit the mansion without an appointment, but if they weren't friends with Rio, they would risk incurring Charlotte's wrath. There was significant meaning in the fact that a high-ranking royal was serving as the point of contact for a regular noble. They had built such a strong wall, even a duke like Gregory hesitated to visit unannounced without having a good reason. What do we do, then? We have no choice but to wait for him to leave his mansion and make contact in some way. It will require monitoring movements at the mansion, but you can leave that to me. Thank you. Since he left the mansion quite often, Rio was actually one of the residents who was easier to meet. It wouldn't be that hard to track when he went out if Duke Gregory placed a few castle guards under his command nearby to watch the mansion. That aside, do you have a duty at the restoration right now? I need you to be available to move as soon as he leaves the mansion. I'm a knight of the restoration right now, so I assist in the patrols of the castle. My assignment is the area around the guest house though. In that case, I will arrange to have you transferred to the area around his mansion. I'll also speak to the supervisor of that area to give you the freedom to move around. That way you'll have an excuse to give your father, yes? Why yes, I would appreciate that. With Duke Gregory's cooperation, something that would have been difficult for Stuart to do without connections was easily made possible. Also, there's one thing I'd like to ask of you. What is it? The restoration's uniform will stand out, so can you lend me Galark's uniform? Stuart asked, looking down at his own uniform with a self-deprecating smirk. Duke Gregory saw a glimpse of the inferiority complex Stuart had over his uniform and nodded with a knowing look. Very well. I will have that arranged, he said. Thank you very much. Stuart thanked him happily for the umpteenth time that day.